The Third Worst Year by TheFrancakes. Read by LMX Mabella. Summary. Draco Malfoy has 1 year to fall in true love with Harry Potter or be turned into a dragon. And he knows that is never gonna happen. This is going to be the worst year of his life. Well, minus that whole having to kill Dumbledore or be killed by Voldemort thing. Second worst year. Oh, but there was his whole 7th year while Voldemort was using his house as a home base for Death Eaters and making him torture his fellow students. That one was pretty bad too. Fine, this is his 3rd worst year of his life. Notes. Prompt details. Draco will turn into a dragon on his 25th birthday. The only thing that can save him is a true love's kiss. His true love, Harry Potter. Draco just turned 24 and is getting his affairs in order because not gonna happen. 1. 365 days. On the quarter, the skin will shift to scales, the breath will turn to smoke, and the nothingness will be consumed by fire. Only the chosen can save the sinner's heart with a true love's kiss, so tender it slayed a dragon. Draco Malfoy leaned back in his chair, watching the smoky figure of Trelawney dissipate. With his arms crossed, he regarded the spot with calculating eyes. He didn't move. Everyone in the dark room watched him for his reaction. They were accepting a poor one at that. He leaned forward, putting his elbows on his knees, and scrubbed his face. Finally, he uncovered his face and looked around. "Are you sure I'm the sinner? It's not like I actually killed anyone. Maimed and maybe tortured a little, but still, could be Zabini," he said, with sarcasm in his tone that matched his crisp black suit. "Malfoy, you need to take this seriously." Some grouchy unspeakable barked at him. Draco arched a dark eyebrow. "If you don't find true love, you'll be turned into a dragon on your next birthday." "Frankly, I'd rather die," Draco scoffed, pushing a few stray locks of white blonde hair from his eyes. Because if the prophecy was really meant for him as retribution for all the damage he caused in the war, he would rather be a dragon over the alternative. Plus, there were some rather hot dragon keepers out there if he remembered his 4th year correctly. Because while maybe these Department of Mystery employees weren't putting the puzzle pieces together, Draco was too smart for the fates. Honestly, they needed a better writer, something not so obvious so that maybe he'd give a damn and try to find love or some shit. Because if he had deciphered the message correctly, there was no fucking way in hell he was ever going to kiss Harry Potter, the chosen one. 364.5. On his way home, Draco stopped in a muggle store on the corner. He purchased a handle of bourbon, a Kit Kat, and a calendar full of happy kittens with inspirational phrases. This wasn't unusual. Well, the muggle store part. The calendar was odd, but if he was going to track the days he had left until he couldn't sneeze without spewing fire, it made sense. It was either kittens or half-dressed firefighters, and that seemed a little too ironic even for his liking. This was going to be the worst year of his life. Well, minus that whole having to kill Dumbledore or be killed by Voldemort thing. 2nd worst year. Oh, but there was his whole 7th year while Voldemort was using his house as a home base for Death Eaters and making him torture his fellow students. That one was pretty bad too. Fine, this was the 3rd worst year of his life. Upon getting back to his London penthouse flat, Draco drank straight from the bottle and tried to remove a rather expensive painting that the decorator his mother hired chose from the wall. He'd always found it a bit drab anyways. He found his mother had magicked it to the wall with a Malfoy family sticking spell, so only an honored Malfoy family member could take it down to prevent theft. Stupid for such an ugly thing, but it probably cost a stupid amount as well. He thought he probably should donate it to a museum, but then again, there was a bin for the second-hand store that was much closer. He'd drop it off on the way to work one day. Once it was down, he magicked a calendar to stick where the painting once had hung. "Hang in there!" an orange kitten hanging from a branch told him. "Good joke," he told the kitten, even though it didn't move like wizarding photos. It was probably for the best. He flipped through the month, checking out the other kittens and quickly counting the days. The reality of the situation hit him hard, and only one word came to mind. Fuck! 359. Dear Astoria, due to a new development, our marriage contract is null and void from this moment onward. I could explain further, but honestly, I just don't want to. Thank you for letting me put it in your ass all those times. You'll make a great pureblood wife someday. DLM. The next morning. Astoria was livid! Pansy gasped, her voice so shrill it could break glass. And maybe that was just because Draco was nursing a hangover that made his vision go a little blurry when she spoke too quickly. As if reading his mind, Blaze poured a cup of fire whiskey that he'd brought over and slid it across the counter to Draco. His friend might have been a few words, but he always knew exactly how to take care of his friends. Why? Draco said between greedy sips. I'm sure you calmed her down just fine. It took forever, Pansy whined. You take the galleons away from the posh pureblood bread for reparations, but you couldn't take the posh pureblood bread out of the girl. Or something like that. She always takes forever to come. Draco rolled his eyes. Penny didn't deny the implication. Where's Theo? We figured this was a coming to Merlin that you two were deeply in love with each other. Pansy asked, changing the subject. She found her own cup from the cabinet and put a finger to sip on. Draco grinned. He was right about the Astoria thing. Pansy only drank fire whiskey after a good fuck. Draco scoffed. We always fight over who tops. It'd never work. He makes a good bossy bottom when he wants to, Blaze murmured with a shrug. Pansy and Draco stared at him, waiting for further information. Theo's busy, Draco sighed and continued the conversation. The fates revealed my stupid one true love, though. That's why the contract voided. You're fucking me, Pansy gasped. I'm probably the only person that's not, Draco shot back offhandedly. And me, Blaze said, raising his hand. Not yet. Pansy corrected Blaze, giving him a wink and ignoring his eye roll before turning to Draco. Well, who is it? You can't just say that and then not tell us. He didn't want to say. He knew that when he finally said the name aloud, then it would be cemented and true. He could deny it all he wanted if no one else knew. It's not like he was telling them about the whole turning into a dragon part of it. No, fuck that. He didn't need their stupid advice to handle that. Thanks. Potter, Draco muttered under his breath. Pansy peed herself right there in the middle of the kitchen from laughing too hard. 351. It wasn't that Draco still hated Potter the way he had back at Hogwarts. The whole Death Eater versus Boy Who Lived, Draco attempting to kill Dumbledore, father trying to kill Potter's girlfriend, accidentally slicing Draco open in the bathroom, drawing room incident, inquisitorial squad, Quidditch rivalry, vanishing cabinet, etc., etc. It was all old news between the foes. No, really, now he hated Potter because no matter what, the man was always a mess. He always looked like he'd just rolled out of bed, shoving on his clothes, and grabbed a pancake like it was a bloody piece of bread to munch on as he stepped through the flue. His papers would then have a soft hint of butter and maple syrup and carbohydrates laced through them all day long. He hated Potter because he didn't keep his face clean-shaven anymore, now preferring a layer of scruff that matched the hair on his head in both color and disloyalty to staying in any sort of shape. Draco hated that Potter's glasses were the same. He would even put money on them being the same pair from first year. It was obnoxious how well they still fit his facial features. Furthermore, the whole fame and fortune and heroism shit did not go to Potter's head. He was humble, modest even, and liked to hide in the background. When both he and Draco were up for the prominent of lead aura of the Unforgivable division, Potter suggested they share the title and be co-leads. Draco wanted to use an unforgivable on the man because it was a bloody brilliant idea and he should have thought of it himself. Also because now they'd have to work together in a tandem. Now they weren't just co-workers, but working together in the same office day in and day out. Their desks faced each other, but clearly the space was not shared. Draco's side of the room was meticulously to the point he was even embarrassed, but he liked it clean, organized, and sparse. Potter's side was every bit the same mess as his wardrobe, and he was never phased in the slightest when an important folder went missing. The worst of it was not that they were just co-leads, but the proximity had made them become friends. They were always chatting about this or that, Quidditch or home life, bad dates or stupid things their friends did. They cracked jokes constantly and were no longer name-called, but teased in a playful way that ended in them laughing for hours. Sometimes they called it quits early to grab happy hour at the Leaky. Like this morning, Potter was late. It was 15 past the hour, and there was no Saint Potter seated at the desk across from Draco. Interdepartmental memos flew around the desk, nervously shaking with the need to be read urgently. Draco had once attempted to collect the stupid paper airplanes, but they dive-bombed him as they were for Potter's eyes only, so now he just threw paper clips at them in retaliation and maybe a touch of immaturity. It was 23 past the hour when Potter waltzed in, wearing a plaid flannel overshirt, unbuttoned to reveal just a plain black shirt underneath. Draco hated how tight it was, how it stretched over Potter's sculpted muscles. It was rude and offensive. "Sorry, overslept," Potter apologized, running a hand through his already messy hair and plopping in his chair. He didn't even care to pluck the memos from the air. "Don't apologize. The silence was nice," Draco said back with a tone that was much snappier than he meant. Green eyes flickered up to him and devoured his being. He could feel Potter taking him in, assessing his posture and every possible clue of what was boiling underneath. Draco stole into himself, building his occlumency walls, even though he knew Potter was shit at legilimency, especially without a wand and spell set. "Did you have a nice birthday, Holes?" Potter asked finally. "Not exactly," Draco conceded. He had taken time off to enjoy his birthday, not thinking he would be dragged into the ministry to be delivered a bullshit prophecy. Though he did spend much of his time off drunk, just not on a yacht in France, with the June sun on his skin and his friends laughing around him. "That's too bad," Potter said, shifting in his seat nervously. He always did that, as if he had more to say, but knew not to say it. Sometimes Draco would enjoy watching the man squirm adorably, then tell him to spit it out, but this morning was not one of those times. He went back to his paperwork instead. How the fuck was he going to be able to work across from Potter for another year, knowing what he knew now? How could he even be friendly when he knew it would all be over soon? Finally, the mess of a human spoke again. I got you something. A present for your birthday, I mean." Draco looked up, silver eyes finding Potter holding a small package across the desk. It was wrapped in brown parchment and tied with a shoelace of all things. He regarded the gift before taking it, making sure his long, pale fingers did not touch Potter's. His signet ring glinted in the charmed sunny window, and Potter's nails looked clean and shaped nicely, albeit a bit stubby for once. Draco sat back in his chair and slowly unwrapped the package, making sure to tear at the edges and savor the joy of a present, no matter how poorly wrapped. He could sense Potter fidgeting in his seat across from him. Obviously, it wasn't elegant paper to save, but Draco had never torn into a present. Never been allowed to. When he popped the top of the small box, a snitch flew out. It hovered in front of Draco's face, flapping its wings quickly, but with no intention of escaping. The sun caught the metal surface, winking at him, telling him to catch it. Draco felt nervous to touch it, so he just let it float, unsure if this was a mockery of his seeking abilities or something different. "It's from our first match together," Potter announced, his voice cracking and gruff with nerves. It always wanted you to catch it, you know. It was hovering by you the whole game. So you're saying I was just oblivious and a bad seeker? Draco asked, finally looking back at Potter and raising a dark eyebrow. He meant it as a tease, but the other former seeker blushed and shifted awkwardly in his seat. Draco kept his face blank while he internally savored watching Potter fall apart and memorized the way his blush spread from his neck upwards instead of starting in his cheeks. No, I just... He gulped down air. Whatever he wanted to say was getting lost in his mind, making Draco skeptical and nervous himself. I always thought you were a brilliant seeker. You were just better, Draco replied with another tease, this time trying to hide his own blush. Shut up, Potter chuckled. It always wanted to be yours, is what I'm trying to say. Nothing wants to be mine, Draco laughed, shaking his head as he watched the snitch fly away from his face and up to the ceiling, joining the circling memos above Potter's head, out of Draco's reach. Not his at all. Potter shifted again, another quip on his tongue he fought to keep under control. Well, I hope you have a better birthday next year, then. Potter finally settled with a small, pitying smile, and finally collected his memos from the air to get to work. Draco watched the dark-haired man for a moment longer, the way Potter's bright green eyes read over the parchment, and how he bit his slightly chapped bottom in a thought. How Potter found his quill in the mess on his desk without even looking. How he silently mouthed the words he scratched back in reply, then scrunched his nose when he misspelled something and had to cross it out. The irony of everything, how next year his birthday would be his end. How this man, across from him, could be his savior. Again, how a year was so far away, and also no time at all. The snitch made its way back to Draco, but the man didn't reach out and catch it. Doubtful. Draco sighed to himself and started back on his paperwork. Finally, out of everything, Draco hated Potter because he was pretty sure he was already in love with the man. To be continued. 2. Somewhere between 346 and 331. Fantastic beasts and where to find them. Dragons, class XXXX. These creatures are known wizard killers and are impossible to train or domesticate. Common Welsh green. The common Welsh was green in color and with 2 spiked horns that resided on top of its head. A native dragon of Great Britain. Well, that one would be boring as hell, but boring was better than some of the other options. Hebridean black. It had dark, rough scales, ridges along its back, and a tail tipped with an arrow-shaped spike. The Hebridean black had brilliant purple eyes and could grow to be up to 30 feet long. Sounds intimidating. Definitely in the top 5, maybe even top 3. Rather intrigued by the idea of having purple eyes, actually. Hungarian horntail. Considered to be the most dangerous dragon. It had black scales and was lizard-like in appearance. It also had yellow eyes, bronze horns, and similarly colored spikes that protruded from its long tail. It would be too on the nose to become the same fucking dragon as Potter's Tri-Wizard task, wouldn't it? And then again, the fates are uncreative fools, apparently. I hate this. French Tarrasque. The Tarrasque was said to dwell in Provence. A fearsome creature, it supposedly had the head and jaws of a lion, the body of a turtle, 6 bear-like legs, and a scaly tail ending in a scorpion's sting. How is this even considered a dragon? Rather die. Should have blazed there just in case I'll need to be taken out immediately. Fearsome my ass. Ukrainian iron belly. The largest dragon breed ever recorded. Metallic grey in color, with an immense wingspan, long talons and rough scales, said to be as hard as steel. Top choice, but I'm sure I don't get a choice. Better ask Mother if there's any Ukrainian in the bloodline. 320. Ukrainian? No, not as far as I know. French from your father, and there is some Japanese in the black line, but that's more on your cousin's side. Draco's mother explained, levitating the teapot across the patio table. He wasn't sure how there was a cousin's side, seeing as the Blacks interbred for decades, but he didn't care enough to ask. Instead, he shook his head to the tea. She still poured him a new cup. Narcissa Malfoy never took no as an answer. Japanese, not Chinese, he clarified, and she shook her head. Damn, there went his chances for a Chinese fireball. Why do you ask? She hummed between silent sips of hibiscus tea. He didn't like the taste, but he wasn't about to complain. No reason. I've got to get going, though. He tried, but she gave him that look, and he knew to stay seated. You can go after you tell me why you broke things off with Astoria, she said with a stern tone, her blue eyes matching the ice in her voice. Ah, so you heard about that? Draco grimaced. I got a howler from her mother. Narcissa grumbled with an eye roll. Draco grimaced even further. If he was still 14, he'd probably have started apologizing for putting his mother through such an event. Also, he probably would have been sent to his room without supper for treating Astoria in that way. Thank God he was a decade older. Not that I'm terribly upset about losing the Greengrasses as in-laws, but I thought you were actually rather taken with the girl, Narcissa said with a nonchalant polish that only those close to her knew to be her perfected fishing strategy. Draco had figured it out at some point in his teen years when she was snooping for information on what he and Theo got up to in the Knot greenhouse after family dinners together. She was acceptable by you and father and a fun shack, but there was no feelings involved, at least on my side of things, Draco explained, trying to mirror his mother's nonchalant tone by giving her details that didn't truly matter. So, what changed? Is it Theo? She asked, raising an eyebrow. Merlin, why does everyone think I'm suddenly in love with Theo? He groaned, slouching in his chair and running his hand through his hair. Suddenly? She asked, eyebrow raising, a smirk on her lips from a memory of exactly what she found in the greenhouse when checking up on them. Theo on his knees, Draco's cock in his mouth, and his mum opening the door asking if they'd like ice cream for dessert. He wanted to die again just thinking about it. That was a phase, Draco muttered. A phase that lasted almost 5 years on and off, but you didn't have to know that. Well, the Theo part. The males, not so much. So there is someone? Narcissa preened, her smirk turning to a smile. Draco knew she always wanted a love match for him. When she told him about accepting the marriage arrangement with Astoria, she had given him a good 2-hour lecture about finding true love. Merlin, if she only knew what he was dealing with now. But no, he had made the decision not to tell her about the prophecy. He knew she'd be devastated by the news and push him to do everything in his power to court Potter. He didn't blame her. Having a little dragon as a son probably wasn't a very fun time for holidays or winter ski trips to the Alps. No, Mother, I just realized you were right, he explained. If I were to find love, I'd like to be able to choose it. Or in this case, not choose it. 314. Probably. Auror Potter stops possible dark cult. Harry Potter, lead Auror of the Unforgivable Divisions, stopped a possible dark cult this Tuesday evening during their initiation ceremony and arrested 4 wizards, including 2 former Death Eaters. Though Potter would not speak on what the ceremony entailed, whispers around Nocturne Alley suggest that the use of the Imperious Curse on Muggles was one of the main trials. Unfortunately, the arrests did not happen peacefully. Almost an hour's worth of spell battles commenced once the Aurors were on the scene. A source inside the department reported this may have been due to the Aurors apparating to the wrong destination. The source reported their speculation that the incorrect location had been given to Potter on purpose in an attempt on his life, and an internal investigation has been called for. There were thankfully no injuries, but half of the manner the ceremony took place collapsed due to errant spells. Potter heroically saved our Draco Malfoy from the falling rubble, and yet the two were seen yelling at each other afterwards, leading to further suspicion that Potter believes Malfoy was trying to help the Death Eaters escape. As well known, Potter mercifully allowed the former Death Eater onto his team. A correlation between the cult's Death Eaters and Malfoy has been suggested, but no one from within the department will confirm or deny if Malfoy is, once again, suspected of tampering with ministry records. Draco rolled his eyes as he crumpled the paper. Beyond the paper getting it horribly backward, if he really wanted Potter to save his life, he'd kiss the man. The raid had gone smoothly, minus the normal stupidity that came with every raid. Mostly, someone had said they were to go to a street instead of an avenue and ended up in front of the intended location instead of behind it, alerting everyone to their presence. There had been a few minutes of dueling with the cult inside the manor, but it was over relatively quickly. Maybe 10 minutes tops. Draco was quick with a shield spell, keeping Potter and himself from being hit by a flame curse. Potter then cast an extinguishing spell in the direction of the ricocheting curse, dousing the fire before it even started to burn. If anyone, save the culprits, had been watching, they would have noted how the two auras worked in perfect tandem, expecting the other's spell work before it was even cast. They were both experts in their fields, masters at their spellwork, and the prime example of law enforcement at its best. Draco's eyes glanced at the messy desk across from him, still empty even though it was 10 till the hour. He suspected he wouldn't see Potter for at least another half hour, maybe longer, if he was nursing a hangover after the number of whiskey shots he did at the pub the night prior. Honestly, he'd never bicker with Potter about what pub has a better happy hour again, especially if it would be reported as a screaming match. Surprisingly, Potter burst in at exactly 9, with his hair looking extra bedheady. His glasses were smudged and tilted in a way that made him look much more curious than normal. "Morning," Draco chuckled, rolling his sleeves in nice crisp folds. "We should drink more often if hangovers are what make you on time." "Sure, you're here," Potter grumbled. "You didn't see the paper yet, did you?" "Ah, yes. Thank you for saving my life once again," Draco deadpanned. Potter's face crunched with something between anguish and annoyance. "I already wrote the paper trying to get it all redacted," Potter grumbled, plopping into his chair with no elegance whatsoever. Draco had a flash of the night before. Potter slumped in the booth across from him, tired but laughing hard at his own joke. Draco was pretty sure he'd laughed along too. "You don't have to do that," Draco murmured. "It won't matter in a year anyways." "Why? What's happening in a year?" Potter asked, perking up and sitting a bit taller. Even his hair seemed to perk up. It was such a Potter thing, curious at every clue and ready to learn a whole new world of information. It was cute when it wasn't about Draco's business. Draco realized his fault and closed in on himself. He swallowed and looked down at his hands, pale and scarred from when he covered his face from the chandelier crashing. He fiddled with his signet ring. Nothing that'll make the news," he finally shrugged. If he looked up, he would have seen concern and worry crossing Potter's features. He would have seen the brunette fumble for something to say, opening his mouth once, twice, and a third time with words of support, but failing to find the right ones. If he looked up, maybe he'd known he wasn't so alone in his feelings. But unfortunately, Draco didn't. 311. This month's kitten was a black Bombay with green eyes curled up around a ball of pink yarn. "Be brave, be bold, be beautiful." Draco regretted not buying the firefighter calendar. Potter's birthday. Unlike Draco's birthday, Potter's was practically a paid holiday. It was a top story in the newspaper, and there were events around the city to celebrate. Even when Draco entered his office, he found the golden couple had decorated it with streamers in gold and red. "It's crooked," Draco commented, standing in the doorway as he watched Weasley and Granger try to spell parchment to the wall behind Potter's desk. "Ron, pay attention!" Granger groaned from where she stood, very pregnant and exhausted looking. "I am," her husband snapped right back. Matrimonial bliss," Draco teased. Though he had not become great friends with the married couple, he had been to the pub a handful of times after work, and the three had become amicable, if not friendly. Granger was a bit easier to warm up to and get along with, but that probably surprised no one. He moved to his side of the office, which they thankfully left undecorated and untouched. He knew Granger's office was just like his when it came to organization, and she probably gave Weasley a good lecture about not messing up any of his things. "Sorry to be in your way. We just wanted to get this done before Harry got in." Granger sighed, tucking some of her stray curls back into the bun they refused to stay in. She rested her hand on a baby bump like an armrest. "Not a problem. Would you like to sit?" he asked, nodding to his desk chair. She honestly looked like she could burst any moment. "It's crooked." Another voice joined them. Potter stood in the doorway, hair sticking up and glasses crooked. "Still!" Granger gasped and tried writing the sign, not noticing it was her friend speaking. Potter and Draco shared a conspiratorial smile as they waited for his friends to realize who spoke. The moment it dawned on them, the banner dropped to the floor and the married couple whipped around with big smiles, gasping at the same time. "Harry!" "Happy birthday, mate." "We wanted to surprise you." "We would have if you weren't such a perfectionist. I wanted it to look nice." Draco watched as the three best friends traded hugs and continued to chat. They were all full of such happiness, laughing together. Potter thanked them both, feeling Granger's stomach and making jokes about the baby being named after him, if she popped on his birthday. The blonde slowly edged his way out of the room, deciding to find himself some coffee while the intimate exchange continued. He had long grown out of his jealousy of their friendship, but watching them together still made him miss his own friends that he would soon be losing. Even if he were to retain his consciousness, as one did when they transformed into an animagus, what would he do? Mate with a female and protect an egg? The idea of dragon sex wasn't the most appealing kink he'd ever entertained. He was sure he'd rather let Pansy peck him than hump a dragon. Draco wasted as much time in the lounge as he could before he returned to his office. A black coffee in one hand and a very sugared coffee with milk in the other. He slowed his steps as he came closer to the office door, not meaning to eavesdrop, but also not wanting to return if the golden couple was still flitting around. "Sorry you got to spend a day with Malfoy, mate." Weasley's voice drifted out the door. "He's not so bad," Potter said with an awkward grumble. "He was perfectly nice," Granger cut in, loud and parental. She was going to be a great mother. "Still, Pris, he barely said 10 words to us," Weasley countered. "I think he's a bit shy these days," Potter said, attempting to whisper, but failing. "Malfoy shy? Sure. And Voldemort returned today as well." Weasley snorted at his own joke. Draco shifted on his feet and leaned against the hallway wall, looking at the hot black liquid in the mug. He understood where Weasley was coming from, the years of taunting and loud need to be the center of attention. The way he shouted across the pitch, "Weasley's our king," and felt the need to make a snide comment whenever the spotlight wasn't on him. But Potter was right, that was then, and now? Now he just wanted to disappear into the coffee he held. He learned his lesson, knew now that it was better to melt into the wall than take up the hallway. He knew no one wanted to hear what he had to say, that he would never earn respect back from the Wizarding World, that there was no way he'd ever fit in with Potter and his friends. This prophecy was probably a good thing. He was too much of a coward to end things himself. Maybe the fates knew what they were doing after all. Thankfully, the golden couple didn't notice him against the wall as they said their goodbyes to Potter and left towards the lift. "Sorry about that," Potter muttered bashfully when Draco entered the office again. The birthday boy messed with his hair with his hand nervously and tried to tuck one of the gold streamers down, but it stayed glued to the ceiling. "I'm just glad her water didn't break and stain the carpet," Draco teased in response. He set the coffee with milk and sugar on Potter's desk before moving to his own. Wouldn't have surprised if it did. She's supposed to be on bed rest, honestly. Potter chuckled, giving up on the streamer and plopping into his chair as he always did. He took a sip of his coffee and smiled to himself. Draco knew the exact amount of sugar and milk by heart now. Draco set his coffee down on the desk and bit his lip. Potter's desk was now loaded with presents and gifts from colleagues, from memos sweeping in to dropping off packages. It wasn't surprising, but it still made his gut twist as he looked at the present on his desk sitting next to the snitch that Potter had given him. The contrast in their life was loud and taunting. There was no chance Potter would ever entertain dating Draco, let alone falling in love. They were from two different worlds, even with the war being over. Black and white, good and evil, loved and hated. This was his end, and still Potter's beginning. Yet, despite the voice in his head telling him to hide the present and let Potter go on with his life, Draco found himself taking the box wrapped in black and silver paper and sliding it across the desk to Potter. "Potter?" Draco gave a weak smile. "For me?" Potter asked, green eyes glowing with surprise as he took in the box. It was as small as the one that Potter had given Draco on his birthday, except the black gift paper was charmed to twinkle with silver constellations that matched the silver ribbon. "Obviously," Draco chuckled. Potter took the gift and delicately inspected it. "It's probably a little silly, but this is beautiful," he said, as if he'd never seen magic paper in his life. "You're supposed to open it," Draco smirked, trying to hide the smile that he wanted to burst through at Potter's awe of just the wrapping. "Oh, right." A blush crept up Potter's neck and started to flush his cheeks as he busied himself by tearing into the paper. Draco imagined a Christmas of torn paper and bows stuck to chests, laughter and cheer at every rip of paper. Nothing he had ever experienced in his own home. When Potter popped the top of the box, a small crystal dragon levitated out of the box, flapping its wings and breathing a small, annoyed puff of smoke from being trapped for so long. It was roughly the same size as a snitch. The dragon flew upwards and chased the interdepartmental memos, breathing little harmless tufts of fire at the planes. Every time its crystal wings hit the light, a rainbow sparkled on the walls behind it. "It's not silly at all. I love it," Potter said with his eyes glued to the dragon, a beautiful smile on his lips as he watched like it was his very first time seeing magic. His pure awe made Draco's heart twist in a bittersweet pang. "It kind of reminds me of you," Potter finally said, making it Draco's turn to blush. That wasn't his plan when he bought the gift 4 months ago, when he saw it in Spain and couldn't stop thinking of Potter, but he supposed it was fitting. "What sort of dragon is it?" "Not sure yet," Draco murmured, remembering his research. "I'll have to ask Charlie. He still works at a Romanian dragon sanctuary," Potter said, his eyes returning to the dragon that had landed on one of the gold streamers and begun to munch on the paper. "Weasley?" Draco asked, his interest suddenly changing. "Yeah, Ron's older brother," Potter nodded. "He's been training dragons for almost 13 years now, I think. Maybe longer." "Huh. Interesting," Draco hummed to himself, thinking that maybe he could secure more of his future than he originally thought. 300 plus minus. Dear Charlie, I've been alerted to the fact that upon my 25th birthday, I will become into possession of a dragon per Malfoy tradition. Seeing as the creature neither fits nor belongs in my London flat, I would like to make arrangements to have the dragon sent to your sanctuary instead. If this is feasible, I would like to visit you as soon as possible. Obviously, money is not an issue. Sincerely, Draco Malfoy. 287. Flipping on the lights to his flat, Draco jumped at the finger lounging on his couch. He was ready to throw a curse in the direction of the wizard, but luckily the identity registered before any harm was done. "Merlin's tits! Theo, what the fuck?" Draco gasped, throwing his wand on the coffee table and running his hand through his hair with frustration. Theo in turn found this hilarious. He tried to cover his face with his hands to muffle his laughter, but it was no use. "I thought auras were supposed to be on guard, constant vigilance, or whatever that crap is." Yeah, I almost crucialed you, you idiot, Draco grumbled with an eye roll, walking into his flat towards the kitchen. He noticed Theo had already started in on the bourbon and took the opportunity to pour himself one. What are you doing here? Pansy told me you were on the verge of an emotional breakdown, more or less, Theo said, lounging back on the couch like some model with his hands behind his head, but still careful not to mess up his perfectly styled hair. I am not, Draco snapped, drowning the shot before pouring himself another. And that you're not handling Potter being your soulmate very well, Theo continued as if he had not heard his friend. He's not my soulmate, Draco once again snapped. Oh, good, so I still have a shot, Theo preened sarcastically, getting up off the couch and moving to the kitchen with Draco. He stole the bourbon and poured himself a refill. Through the years, Theo had gone from gangly beanstalk with 2 big ears and nose to a man the size of a tree, handsome and chiseled in all the right places. The worst part was he barely even realized he was no longer the quiet, awkward nerd no one but Draco crushed on. There was a prophecy that vaguely alluded to him being my true love, Draco murmured, and drank down his whole drink. He wondered why he was even messing with a cup at this rate. Should just be drinking straight from the bottle. What's vaguely mean? Theo ventured. The sinner and the chosen one, Draco explained. Sinner could be Zabini, Theo mused. Draco sighed. And some shit about a dragon. Theo snorted back a laugh. I always thought your name was stupid. Okay, Junior. Oi! Theo gasped, putting his hand to his heart like he'd be hurt. Draco rolled his eyes. No need to get rude. You're the one that broke into my flat. Touché. Theo chuckled, pointing a finger knowingly at Draco. So, what's the plan then? How do we make Potter fall in love with you? We don't. No? Questioned Theo with fake innocence, the shaved line through his eyebrows making him look even more devilish than he already was. No. Theo rolled his eyes, and a small smirk played on his lips. Draco regarded him suspiciously. Whatever you're planning, Theo, stop it right now, warned Draco. Oh, but what's the fun in that? The brunette sang, with a smile full of mischief, taking another swig of the bourbon. 272. Draco, wish my family had that tradition. We just get handmade sweaters on Christmas with our initials. Totally stoked to set up for your dragon. No money necessary. We're here to keep dragons, and people, I guess, safe. Though a donation is always welcome. Swing by any time and I'll show you around. Best, Charlie. Late 264. The club was way too loud and too crowded. Draco blinked through the flashing lights and glared at the back of Theo's head as they weaved their way towards the VIP area that was roped off from the other tables. Draco swipped a drink from a tray floating by and downed it in one gulp. It might be missed by whoever ordered it, but he sure as hell needed it if he was going to spend longer than 10 minutes in this place. Though most would think, with his posh attitude, that Draco thrived at high-end parties, it really wasn't his scene at all. He was always nervous someone was judging him and going to bring up the past. When the war had just ended, he would get shouted at in the middle of shopping in Diagon Alley. Once he'd been minding his business at the Leaky, and a woman threw her drink in his face for just merrily sitting next to her. All he really wanted to do was go home and pack for Romania. He had not been given his requested time off. Apparently, he had used it all for his birthday and not earned enough back. When he said that he'd take an unpaid day, Kingsley made a fuss about responsibilities and proving that he deserved to be a co-lead, let alone an aura at all. Draco kept his snide remarks about not deserving anything to himself and decided he'd take a weekend trip instead. So this midweek clubbing routine of Theo's was not in Draco's wants or plans. He had attempted to not even come to the club, but his asshole best mate grabbed his arm and disapparated them before he could step into his flat. Care to explain why you had to kidnap me? Draco yelled over the loud music. It was something bumpy with a lot of bass. He didn't hate it, but he wasn't about to admit that. Theo stopped in his tracks for Draco to catch up to him. He held up a finger, pointing through the crowd at the VIP area, where Harry fucking Potter was sitting with Granger, Minnie Weasley, and some of their friends. "I'm leaving," Draco declared, but just then Potter looked right in his direction. Green eyes locked on Silver, and a smile spread across Potter's face. "Damn it." "Liar." Theo chuckled and pulled Draco to start walking again. "Next time I see you, I really am going to crucio you." Draco shot back at Theo just before they reached the group. There were drinks all over the table, half drunk and clearly a sign the party had been going on for a bit. Even under the flashing lights, Draco noticed how flushed Potter's cheeks already were. Draco and Theo said their hellos, Theo by giving hugs and Draco head nods with his hands shoved in his pocket. "Sorry we're late and missed the surprise. Draco here mixed up the days." Theo lied flawlessly. Draco shot him a look of murder, but Theo barely even flinched. "Nothing like a birthday party a month late," Potter said awkwardly, standing up to welcome Draco. Draco just stood, unsure what to do with his hands. Did they shake hands? Should they hug? Maybe one of those half-hugs heterosexual males did that were a blatant cover for wanting to suck each other's cocks? Potter seemed unsure what to do as well, and settled with just messing up his hair with his hand and shifting from foot to foot. It looked as if his friends had attempted to make him dress up for the club in a black jean and shirt combo. But he still looked just so Potter. It made Draco melt worse than if Potter had found the correct attire. "Though I think it was a bit more of an excuse for Hermione and Ron to get out of the house," Potter said loudly enough for the golden couple to hear. "Oi, you have a newborn and not leave the house for a month and then come talk to me, all right?" Weasley shot back, obviously only a few drinks from drunk. His wife seemed just as pissed. "Come on, Harry, you promised me you'd dance," she smiled, tugging on his sleeve towards the dance floor. She bit her lip as her eyes shifted from her friend to Draco, as if trying to hide a smile. Draco suddenly had a feeling that she and Theo had a talk recently. "You should come dance too, Malfoy. Harry won't mind." They most definitely had a talk. Draco swallowed hard, glancing at the dance floor where everyone was letting go, being free, forgetting all their problems. It was tempting, but he knew it wasn't that easy. Not for him. He glanced back at Potter, looking him up and down, thinking of their bodies pressed together, the aftershave Potter wore mixing with his sweat. Draco swallowed hard. "I'm going to grab a drink first, then I'll join you," Draco said. Granger grinned and nodded before pulling Potter after her. Draco did not join them. Just past midnight. Actually, it was 23 past midnight, if you wanted to be exact. Surely that was an acceptable time to leave. It was a weeknight, after all. Still, Draco chose to pull an Irish goodbye and leave out the back exit without anyone seeing. He had spent the majority of his time drinking with Theo, chatting with some Gryffindors, including a very heated conversation with Weasley about Quidditch, and none of it dancing. Occasionally he spoke with Potter when the brunette came by the table for a drink or to escape Granger's grasp, but definitely not enough to appease Theo's glaring eyes. Which is why he was escaping while Theo was distracted by Lovegood's hips pressed to his on the dance floor. The night air hit him instantly, cool and welcoming. Its crispness was an instant slap in the face, alerting him to how much he drank. He wasn't drunk, but he could feel the liquor on his cheeks, and his perfect white teeth were numb. Okay, maybe he was a touch drunk, but just a touch. He took another step and found just around the corner of the door Potter sitting atop a short brick wall, cigarette in hand, looking up at the stars. The constellations reflected in his glasses, making his eyes sparkle in the way that always made Draco breathless. "I didn't know you smoked, Potter," Draco drawled. He should have walked away. He should have just left the man alone, but the liquor didn't let him. His decade-and-a-half crush pushed him to walk over and sit right next down to his once enemy. "I don't," he chuckled, but that damn blush crept upward. It made Draco want to put his mouth on the tense skin of Potter's clavicle. He regarded the cigarette in his hand and shrugged. "Well, only when I drink, and sometimes when I'm stressed, and sometimes just when I want to, Please don't tell Hermione. It's a clove if that helps. I'm not sure that's any better, Draco chuckled. You're probably right, but... Potter shrugged and took another drag. Draco watched as the other man took a drag and then plucked the clove cigarette from between his fingers and brought it to his own lips. The smoke slightly burnt his insides. He knew better to inhale. It was not his first cigarette, but the dim fire in his lungs reminded him of his future. The sweet taste of the clove lingered on his lips, causing him to lick them softly. When he looked up, he noticed Potter staring. "You can call me Harry, you know," he whispered, like it was a secret between them. His eyes twinkled. Draco chuckled and nodded softly, whispering in return, "I know." "Then why don't you?" Potter asked innocently. Draco looked up, the green connecting once again with silver, pure and pleading, sincere and drunk. "It makes it easier to ignore," Draco said, biting his lips. He could feel the cigarette start to burn his fingers, but he also couldn't look away from the man in front of him. Potter's brow furrowed a bit. "Ignore what?" "How much I like you," Draco whispered, biting his lip as a tingle of whiskey and feelings took over. Potter's eyes went wide as an owl's as everything processed in his liquored mind. Draco waited for the blush to creep up Potter's neck, but it wasn't coming. He was already warm from dancing, but still. Maybe he didn't. Oh, fuck. A panic ran through Draco, and just as he was about to take it all back, the back door slammed open. "There you are!" Granger shouted. She wavered on her feet, obviously much more drunk than the two men combined. She was obviously loving the chance of giving her mother-in-law the night to babysit. Her eyes turned to Draco and she frowned. "You know, you really shouldn't smoke. It's bad for you." Draco chanced a glance at Potter. His blush was creeping upwards once again. "You're probably right," he conceded as he turned back to Granger, taking another drag. She made a face, but left her mothering behind. "It's our favorite song. We have to dance," she told Harry and waved him inside. "All right," he said, as if he was both nervous and unsure if he should be leaving. He fitted it with his hands, unsure to hold them at his sides or put him in his pockets. He eventually shoved them in deep, as if to just imprison them so they'd stop moving. "I'll see you back inside." The blonde nodded and watched the two best friends go back into the club. Granger took Harry's hand and yanked him inside. But instead of finishing the cigarette and following them, Draco apparated home and hoped to Merlin that Potter was too drunk to remember what he just confessed. 4. Roughly 258. Romania in August was hot, beyond hot. Draco wished he'd worn shorts, and he was not a short sort of man, even if he had nice calves. For most of the day, Draco trekked across the sanctuary, following Charlie as he pointed out the accommodations for each breed of dragon. For the most part, Draco stayed interested. He did want to know where he'd be living and figure out his meal of choice when he turned. Did he want a lakefront cave or one hidden in the forest to hide in the cool shade? What would the menu be like? Would he grow tired of cow and want something different like pig? How did one request that sort of change? They used portkeys to go from dragon den to den, peeking in on sleeping dragons or ones bathing in the sun. Charlie mentioned they could side along, but the portkeys were in safe spaces that wouldn't accidentally land you right in front of a sleeping dragon. The dragons all seemed content and happy for the most part. There were no chains or even invisible fences. According to Charlie, they could fly away and never return. They just didn't want to. It wasn't that they were domesticated either, but that the dragons were smart and preferred peace and safety than ransacking villages and being chased by pitchforks. It was peaceful, though. It wasn't a bad future if you really thought about it. Draco tilted his head to the side as he watched a Norwegian ridgeback drink from a stream, causing the water to stream when it dripped down the side of its mouth. "Have you ever heard of someone turning into a dragon?" Draco asked, breaking the silence. The dragon's eyes shot right at them, but it didn't seem to care about the onlookers and went back to drinking. Charlie turned, though, furrowing his brow, making his sun-kissed freckles wiggle. "Like an animagus?" "Sure," Draco shrugged. "No, not in my experience." Charlie shook his head, a long auburn hair falling into his eyes. his voice low and gruff in a way you would expect. "Why?" Draco shrugged again. "No reason." The Ridgeback extended his wings and used them to move a soft breeze through the trees, cooling them all. "Would be pretty cool, though," Charlie said, breaking the silence once again. "You think? I think it'd be lonely, with everyone being so scared of you, thinking you might hurt them any second." Draco hummed thoughtfully. "Not even worth giving you a chance, really." He thought about the last few days, how Potter had avoided him at work and said nothing that wasn't work-related. Maybe he had been too drunk to remember. Maybe he did remember, and he wanted nothing to do with Draco's feeling. Maybe the past still ran deep, and Draco was just an idiot to think things were any different. Draco knew he'd been stupid to confess anything. He still had no idea why he had. "Sounds like you're talking about more than just dragons," mused Charlie with a chuckle that matched the sunlight. "Huh, maybe." Draco blushed softly, shifting on his feet awkwardly. He looked back at the dragon, at the stream that had laid down to take a snooze in the sun. "Might have more in common than just the name." "Like being beautiful and strong?" Charlie asked, raising an eyebrow and smiling over at him. Draco's blush darkened. "I don't know about that." "I do." Charlie nodded, hands in his pocket. "I think it's time to show the other thing us dragon keepers get up to out here." "What's that?" Draco asked. It was now his turn to raise an eyebrow. "Get bloody pissed." Charlie laughed, clapping Draco on the back and apparating them back to the keeper's village. 257. Getting drunk with the dragon keepers was not a smart idea. They were World Cup-level drinkers. Bottles of whiskey were drained in shot competitions, and they introduced Draco to muggle drinking games. He was exceptionally good at the one where he threw a snitch-sized ball into cups, but a comical joke at trying to flip his cup over correctly. Granted, he'd been so smashed by then, he still wasn't sure which way the cup was supposed to land. The night quickly got away with him due to the buzz of the liquor and the pressure of being Draco Malfoy dissipating quickly. No one seemed to care about the past, about the war, about his cowardly deeds and awful choices. They all shook his hand and welcomed him into their club the second he sunk a ball perfectly into a cup. It was how he wished life always was. It had been easy to get lost in the night of being anyone but himself. Which is maybe why he started returning Charlie's secret smirks. Why he let the dragon keeper hold his hand under the table and pinch his ass when no one was looking. Why he wet his lips when he caught Charlie looking at them. Why he didn't put up any fight as he was pushed up against the wall on smoke break and snog the fuck out of the man. He didn't taste like cloves, but it was close enough. Honestly, those lips must have had a lost spell cast on them. They ditched the party quickly after that. It was a drunken haze how they got back to Charlie's place or even lost their clothes. But he remembered the sex, and was good. Really fucking good. It was bent over the couch and got railed until you couldn't remember your name. It was lifted off the ground, legs wrapped around his waist, muscles pulsing and being impaled deep on his cockwood. It was fucked so hard so many times you sleep in too late to sneak out before the other person awoke, and you had to face all the shame of the things you moaned and how many times you came good. Draco found Charlie in the kitchen, fixing coffee and some breakfast for both of them. He wore joggers low on his hips that didn't hide away the part of him Draco remembered being intimately inside of his mouth the night before. "Made some breakfast so you don't portkey on an empty stomach." The freckled man smirked as he placed some toast and eggs on the counter. Draco liked how he wasn't ashamed about the scars across his chest. He'd never had that sort of confidence with his own. He had that rugged sort of bad boy element that was sexy no matter what way you looked at it. "I don't know how empty it is. Might still be a little drunk," Draco chuckled, pulling his shirt over his head and sitting down at a bar stool across from Charlie. "Yeah, it's just liquor in there," Charlie teased with a wink. "Oi!" Draco gasped and threw a napkin at the men, causing them to break out into laughter. As he took a sip of his coffee, Draco was almost glad he wasn't able to sneak out. Maybe he'd gotten a good fuck, but he'd also seemed to have gotten a good friend. It was the first time in a long time that he felt like himself and not the person the Wizarding World decided him to be. Maybe he wouldn't be so alone when this life was finally over. 242. For the most part, Draco had been doing better since visiting the Dragon Sanctuary. While knowing life as he knew it had a definite end, he was starting to feel as if that still didn't mean it was the end completely. Sure, he would be a dragon. Sure, he wouldn't be able to communicate with his friends. Sure, he'd have to live in a cave. Sure, he probably would light the forest on fire when he sneezed. But at least it wasn't going to be completely over. He'd arrived back to work a little more confident, feeling a little better about himself with Charlie's words as armor. It wasn't until he realized nothing had changed that everything started to falter again. Work was work. His colleagues ignored him and spoke to Potter. The paper wrote about how Potter saved the day and Draco was plotting against him. And worst of all, Potter was back to the silent treatment. The first day, Draco did his best to not let it get to him. He did his best to think it was Potter, not him. Maybe Potter had a bad weekend, or maybe he was tired from a good one. But when Draco asked, Potter just gave a shrug and said it was fine. It could have been a lie. It was really none of Draco's business. It's not like they were close friends. But the way that Potter looked at him, with a bit of hurt and confusion, Draco felt a pang of guilt in his heart. The pang only festered as the days went on. Whatever high Draco had gotten from his weekend in Romania quickly dissolved. Unfortunately, that wasn't the worst of it. The longer the silence stayed between them, the louder it got. Whenever they had to speak about work, Potter was short and curt with Draco. In turn, Draco started to snap his replies and leave passive-aggressive notes on Potter's desk. As retaliation, Potter started stomping about and throwing down files. He could even make a single sheet of paper hitting his desk be loud and obtrusive. Finally, after so many days, Draco snapped. "Bloody fucking hell, Potter! What is it?" Draco sniped, throwing his quill on his desk after Potter spilled his ink by slamming a drawer. "What is what?" Potter sniped back. "I don't fucking know. You've been pissed off at me for whatever reason for almost a month now." Draco pushed back from his desk, using a wandless spell to clean up the ink. "No, I haven't," Potter muttered. Draco shot him a scathing look from across the room. He remembered Potter having a temper at Hogwarts. He supposed this was his attempt to keep it in, instead of his little outbursts that ended in Draco bleeding on the bathroom floor. "You know you're a bloody awful liar," Draco said, crossing his arms. Potter glared from behind his glasses, taking the bait and finally giving Draco his full attention. "Fine. What I don't get is, you go from being my friend and then at the club." Potter faltered for a moment, licking his lips as he thought of the words, probably trying to remember through his liquor. "At the club, you just ditched us without goodbye." "That's what this is about, that I didn't say goodbye?" asked Draco incredulously. For a moment he'd been worried there was more to it, that Potter remembered what he had said, but the brunette across from him, with wild hair and wide green eyes, didn't hint at anything more. "Well, that, and—" Potter faltered again, took a breath, and then spoke once more. "You also barely spoke to me afterwards, and then spent a random weekend with Charlie Weasley, of all people. You hate the Weasleys." "First, you barely spoke to me, and second, I don't hate the Weasleys. Most of them, anyways." Draco scoffed. "It was a business trip." "That's not how Charlie made it sound," Potter muttered, offhandedly under his breath, but Draco still heard. The blonde pounced at the accusation. Draco rolled his eyes. "Oh, so that's what this is about, that I fucked Weasley?" Potter's eyes grew wider, if possible. The anger broke into shock. His voice went grave. "You fucked Charlie?" "More he fucked me, if you must know." Draco hated the words as they came out of his mouth, but he was on a roll now. His petulant, immature side was winning over the rational side, yelling at him to stop because he could see something transforming in Potter's eyes that he couldn't quite place. He'd never seen it before in one of their rows. "Right. Well, then never mind. Forget I said anything," Potter muttered, standing up and starting to pick up his things. "Potter, what the hell?" Draco grumbled, not sure whether their fight was already over. "I think it's best if I finish these up at home," he said, rushing towards the door with his files under his arm. Draco swallowed hard and remembered a conversation all those nights ago. "Harry, Don't!" Potter snapped. "Don't call me that!" Draco pressed his lips together and nodded. He didn't have to ask why. He knew they weren't friends any longer. 5,273 hours.
"No, you self-hate! You're too cute for that!"
A grey kitten with blue eyes yelled at him from the calendar this month. Clearly, the kitten had never self-sabotaged their life by having a one-night stand with their crush's best friend's brother. 5. 6 months left. Things didn't get much better for Draco by the halfway mark. The kitten calendar told him to follow your heart and your dream, but he really wasn't sure how to apply that to his current circumstances. He wasn't even sure he had a dream anymore. Once upon a time, he dreamt of a life of love and safety. He'd think about finally finding peace and not being constantly reminded of his fuck-ups as a child. Sometimes the dream ended with a family with the Malfoy name restored and honored after all his hard work as an auror. Now he could only think about the loneliness of the Romanian forests. And his heart? Well, he treaded that on his own. Ever since his fight with Potter, the two regarded each other with the same level of decorum they did right after the war. Draco mostly kept to himself, didn't speak unless spoken to, and hid in the background at every meeting. He knew it looked poor to the other aurors, that it looked like he didn't deserve to share the co-lead title, which, in his opinion, they'd be right. Draco did his best to mend the fence. He'd bring Potter a cup of coffee in the morning and leave it on his desk. For the first few days, Potter let the coffee go cold. But finally, one random day, he took a sip. A few days later, he murmured a thank you when Draco dropped it off. It wasn't much, but it still felt like the rock on the middle of his chest grew a touch lighter. Draco still wasn't exactly sure what he'd said wrong. Well, he knew he let his temper rise and brought them back to pointless snipes, like back at Hogwarts, but he wasn't sure what Potter was still so angry about. So he left without a goodbye. So he sat with Charlie Weasley. Why did that matter to Potter of all people?
"He's still mad at you?"
Pansy asked as she slid into a booth at the Leaky after work. Her dark eyes drifted from Potter at the bar back to Draco sitting across from her, a slight frown on her lips. "He's not anything with me," Draco clarified with a shrug. He let his silver eyes drift over to the bar. Potter sat next to Weasley, beer in his hand, laughing so hard at something his friend said. He was gorgeous. Draco looked away quickly before he was noticed.
"I feel like you're not telling me something. I don't even understand what you did,"
the dark-haired woman said, sipping on a martini. "I've told you everything, I swear." Draco shrugged, and he was pretty sure he had, for the most part anyways. He might have left out the part about fucking Charlie Weasley and throwing it in Potter's face later. But what was it Potter's business that he fucked someone over a weekend holiday? Did he have to report all his conquests? Not that there were many. Draco was extremely picky, but still. As if reading his mind, Pansy gave him a look.
"You should apologize."
"For what?" Draco scoffed, though it was hollow and fake. He knew she could see right through his faux annoyance.
"Well, you obviously buggered this up somehow, and if he's your true love."
She trailed off, smirking at her secret knowledge. "Say it a little louder, will you?" he snapped at her.
"Just say you'd like to understand what you did wrong so you can apologize and do whatever needed to get him bent over your desk," she cackled.
"Bent over my desk?" Draco asked, raising an eyebrow. Both former Slytherins turned to regard the man in question. Pansy tilted her head to the side as she sized the man up.
"I bet Minnie Weasley pecked him at least once,"
Pansy decided.
"Then again, with that scruff, I'd let him bend me over his desk, or couch, or the kitchen counter. Hell, even the bar he's leaning on right now."
"I'm not letting him bend me over anything," Draco grumbled with an eyebrow.
"Not with that attitude,"
corrected Pansy and took another sip of her drink.
"Looks like Weasley's using the loo. Go talk to him."
Before he could tell her no, she kicked him hard in the shin. He swore hard and gave her the finger, but stood up from the booth, if anything, to escape more violence from the witch. She never stopped at just one kick. Draco had met Pansy right after work, so he was still in his dress shirt and slacks, but had loosened his black tie and ruffled his hair since he'd seen Potter last. Just to give his nervous hands something to do, he rolled up his sleeves as he approached the bar, trying to come up with something to say. All he could come up with was, "Potter, a word?" The other man looked up from his drink, both not shocked to see Draco there, but also surprised to hear them speaking to each other. "Sure, Malfoy, I suppose so," Potter replied, trying to make his voice sound gruff and emotionless. "I want to set things right," he said, putting his hands in his pockets. He tried to repeat what Pansy had said. "And I've been trying to figure out what exactly I've done wrong to cause—"
"You don't know,"
Potter interrupted him. "Well, I was crass and a touch rude." Draco tried to get back on track. "And I'm sorry for that."
"A touch?"
Potter scoffed in a way he might have learned from Draco himself. "I know I should have said goodbye that evening as well." Draco tried to keep his tone level, but he knew his frustration was seeping out. Potter bit his lip, internally debating something Draco couldn't make out. "That's not really why I'm hurt." Draco's brow furrowed. "Then why is it? I don't know what I've done to hurt you, but—" "Merlin, you're bloody awful at apologies. Still waiting for mine from the wall," Weasley cut in, returning to the bar. He was smiling, maybe even joking playfully, but a little confidence Draco had plummeted to the sticky bar floor. He felt embarrassment heat his cheeks. "Ron!" Harry chastised softly. "No, he's right, I am. I just wanted to let you know I'm just sorry, and—" Draco said, swallowing hard, but he couldn't say it, so he finished with, "and yeah." He took a deep breath and focused on the space in front of him, refusing to let himself truly see Potter or Weasley. He would not break down in front of them. He would not be vulnerable, not here, not in front of Potter, not when he had only 6 months left. Like he always did, Draco quickly built his walls and defended himself from the emotions trying to break him. He looked up quickly at the man in front of him and gave a curt nod before leaving quickly. "And I miss you," was what he wasn't brave enough to say. 202. Everyone I've heard. That's still alive, at least. Katie Bell, Madame Rosmerta, Neville Longbottom, Ginny Weasley, honestly, the whole bloody Weasley family, well, minus Charlie, obviously, Granger, Hagrid, Goyle, Myrtle, though she's technically dead, Mom, Potter times 1,000. I feel like I'm missing a lot of people. Fuck, I really am a dick. The entire Wizarding world, and some muggles too. Oh, and that bloody hippogriff, if it's still alive. Christmas Eve. After the war, the manor had gone through a full renovation. Beyond the ministry completely destroying the place, looking for secret passageways and hidden dark magic artifacts, his mother decided to try to restore the manor back into a home. It worked for the most part, with her taste of warm neutral tones and soft plush furniture. All the portraits of relatives had been replaced with sunny landscapes and beautiful florals. All the dark wood was now light and no longer weighed down with books and artifacts, but personal family photos and knickknacks from travels. For Christmas, the house elves had decorated the entire manor with twinkle lights and decor in the same color scheme. Even the tree in the middle of what used to be the drawing room was white and sparkling with glitter and lights. Narcissa had even charmed the wrapping any present put under the tree to turn to a shade of her design. No tacky red and green for the Malfoy manor. Christmas Eve was a small affair compared to the large gatherings there used to be. Instead of all the pureblood families coming for a grand party, now it was only the 3 Malfoys, his Aunt Dromedar, and his cousin Teddy. It was a quiet night, and Draco found himself sitting in his childhood bedroom. Not much had changed since he moved out when he was 18. He almost had to laugh at the amount of dragon paraphernalia around the room. Posters, a mobile in the corner, even a nameplate on his door. He'd even come up with a Lumos spell that would light his ceiling in the Draco constellation when the lights turned out. There was a loud knock at the door, and it slammed open without any pretense. Draco might have been annoyed at the intrusion, but in the doorway stood Teddy, all dressed up in a holiday sweater and antlers with little lights on them.
"Aunt Cissa won't let me open presents until everyone is by the tree,"
announced the young boy haughtily. He had to be 6 or 7 by now. Draco wasn't exactly sure.
Pretty rude of Aunt Cissa,
Draco smirked. The boy nodded vigorously, not catching the sarcasm at all.
I know!
Teddy gasped and pouted. Draco chuckled and stood up from his bed. He took another look around the room, not sure if it'd be the last time he'd been in there. It still belonged to a teenager, but it also still felt a bit like home. He looked back at his cousin, his hair going from playful teal to a contemplative navy. He watched Teddy's eyes take in the room.
You can come in,
Draco offered. Teddy slowly entered the room, drifting towards the dresser and bookshelves to look at all the photos and things he'd collected over the years. His fingers trailed over the wood of the dresser, leaving a trail in the dust. He poked at the photos, laughing when they got angry at his taps. Finally, he noticed Draco's broom hanging on the wall.
You have the numbers 2001?
Teddy gasped, his fingers ghosting over the numbers cut into the wood handle of the broom.
Yeah, it's not a fireball, but it won some games.
Draco chuckled. He watched Teddy's fascination with the broom, and an idea came over him.
Do you want it?
Oh, really? I can have it?
He gasped again, his hair turned a neon pink. Even Draco had to admit it was kind of cute.
Sure, I've got no use for it,
Draco shrugged, walking over to his cousin and pulling the broom from its spot.
Has anyone shown you how to ride it yet?
Uncle Harry says he wants to, but Gwen keeps saying I'm too young.
Teddy explained with such exaggerated pouting you'd think he's been told he could never have ice cream again.
Ah, well, that's the difference between me and Potter. He asks for permission, I ask for forgiveness.
He laughed and messed up Teddy's hair. The little boy's eyes grew as he processed this new way of life he'd never considered before. It was probably a recipe for disaster, but Draco liked knowing he caused a little chaos for once he was gone.
I'll show you after presents.
Forget that! Let's go now! Nothing is going to be as cool as this!
Teddy exploded with innocent excitement that turned his hair green like Muggle traffic lights. Draco wished he could still have that sort of excitement about anything these days. He vaguely felt it when he thought about Potter, but he knew that was just a broken dream these days.
All right,
Draco said, his smile matching Teddy's, grabbing 2 jackets from his closet and throwing one to Teddy.
Right, now it is.
A few days later. The rest of Draco's Christmas holidays had been quiet. He spent the days with his parents, sitting by the fire and reading quietly. Most would find the time boring, but Draco found it warm and peaceful, comforting. It was a few hours that he could sit without the word breathing down his neck. He knew he'd eventually have to tell his parents the bad news, but he still couldn't bring himself to break his mother's heart. He didn't want her thinking he just up and left one day, but he couldn't imagine her attempting to visit him in his dragon form like he knew she would. He didn't want to see her tears again. He returned to work the next day to a mountain of paperwork on his desk from whoever was stuck on desk duty. Most of the time, he'd split it between him and Potter, but ever since the bar, he'd backed off. Draco had his head buried in paperwork when a cup of black coffee was set on his desk. He looked up to see Potter smiling down at him softly. Draco raised an elbow questioningly.
Happy Christmas.
Potter greeted him, a wary smile like he wasn't sure he was allowed to speak.
Happy Christmas.
Draco nodded back, the same wariness to his own voice. Potter made his way to his own desk and plopped in his chair, but dawdled about not getting to any actual work.
Teddy won't shut up about you know,
Potter finally said, breaking the ice a bit harder this time.
Me? He's usually all about you,
Draco said, setting his pen down and leaning back in his chair, welcoming a conversation between friends again, finally.
Oh no, now it's Draco's amazing at flying and Draco's so cool and he's going to beat me as a first-year seeker because Draco taught him how to dive in the snow.
Potter prattled on much like Teddy had all Christmas Eve when they finally got back on the ground. They had flown until Teddy's teeth were chattering, even with warming charms. Draco rode one of his old brooms from the shed and showed his cousin all the tips and tricks for steering the numbers 2001. By the end of the evening, Teddy was doing nosedives and corkscrews like a natural, much to Aunt Cissa's and Aunt Dromedar's dismay. Afterwards, they drank hot cocoa by the fire while Draco shared his old Slytherin playbooks and showed Teddy memories from his games in the family pensive. It was the best Christmas Eve Draco had had in years, maybe ever.
Well, falling off and swallowing the snitch isn't a skill we can all have, Draco snorted.
Potter smiled to himself.
True. You're actually probably the better one to be teaching him Quidditch. You've got loads of years and talent on me.
Hardly,
Draco scoffed, rolling his eyes. While he enjoyed showing Teddy how to fly, the young boy had also continually yelled about how excited he was to show Uncle Harry everything he just learned.
No, really. Gryffindor did just fine when they lost me, but when Slytherin lost you, they weren't the same,
Potter explained. Draco considered Potter's point for a moment. It was fair, but he was still skeptical.
Or Gryffindor was just a better team overall and wasn't being carried by the mediocre seeker,
Potter huffed.
Will you stop doing that?
Doing what?
Evading my compliments,
he grumbled. Draco could tell he was annoyed. That his classic Potter anger was bubbling up inside. But instead of the boy that threw hexes and started fights, he was now a man that knew to stop and think. That gave even pitiful Malfoy a chance at friendship.
I'm not evading it. I'm just...
Draco searched for the right wording.
Saw things differently. Sometimes I still do.
Fine.
Potter rolled his eyes, but didn't continue to fire at it. Instead, went to his paperwork. Draco watched the man across from him, the way his hair fell softly into his eyes, the lightning scar that was almost a beacon of comfort after all these years, how he sucked in his bottom lip and bit it as he scribbled on his parchment. Even in the quietest moments, Draco thought Potter was too beautiful for this world, that he was every nice quality thrown into a single human, that even his flaws guided his way to kindness. It made sense, because what Draco really meant to say was,
I just don't deserve compliments from you.
New Year's Eve.
Come on!
Draco felt a nudge on his shoulder and looked up to see Potter standing next to him, a smile on his lips. That was new, even a little shocking even, but it warmed Draco in a way he'd forgotten.
We've got to finish this report,
he grumbled, yet didn't truly mean it. Who wanted to do work on New Year's anyway?
It's 15 minutes until New Year. I think it can wait,
Potter said, a smile playing on his lips. He moved towards the office door.
Come on.
Draco stood from his desk and followed Potter out of the room. The hallways of the ministry were quiet. Most had gone to celebrate with their friends. Draco himself had been invited to the annual Zabini Gala and was a little bitter that their trainees had fucked up their paperwork so badly that he and Potter were still here trying to fix it all. Draco followed Potter into the lift and felt it move downward so quickly it made his stomach lurch. They stayed silent, standing side by side, hands in their pockets, eyes glancing sideways at the other and quickly looking away when caught. When the lift opened again, they were on the roof.
I still don't understand how magic works sometimes,
Potter chuckled at Draco's raised eyebrows.
It's a bitch like that,
Draco chuckled back. If Potter only knew. He followed the brunette onto the roof, hands still in his pocket, unsure just exactly what they were doing up here.
I should have told you to grab your cloak,
Potter murmured as an ice chill drifted through.
It's all right, I run hot,
Draco hummed. He noticed as winter set in that the cold no longer penetrated his skin. His blood had begun to boil inside of him and keep him warm during even the harshest snow. He supposed it was one perk to becoming closer to turning into a dragon. Potter pulled a carton of clove cigarettes from his pocket and put one between his lips. Draco reached over and lit it by snapping his fingers.
Oh, hey, thanks.
Potter stumbled over his words. Draco nodded and turned to look at the view around them. Wherever they were was tall enough to look down upon most of the buildings and streets. On another night it might have been quiet or just full of traffic, but tonight there was laughter and cheering in the air. There were parties full of people and live music from the other rooftops. There were friends and lovers, couples and families, everyone merry and full of happiness for the new year to come.
If you only had a year to live, how would you spend it?
Draco asked softly, barely aware he even asked aloud. He felt Potter move closer to him, their bodies almost touching side by side as they looked out at the world of happiness before them.
Destroy Horcruxes and save the Wizarding World?
Potter offered with a laughter in his voice. Draco snorted and rolled his eyes. looking over at the mischievous man next to him.
"Sounds taxing, and honestly a little boring."
Potter barked out a laugh, almost coughing on the smoke from a cigarette.
"Merlin, it was. Never want to go camping again in my life."
Draco stole the cigarette and took a drag, his eyes moving back to the muggle parties filled with joy. A calm filled the air before the loud beats of counting.
3, Potter joined the beats. 2.
And then the air filled with loud cheers and deafening blows. The sky lit with color, blasting in plumes of sparkles and bright extravaganza. Draco forgot about the cigarette as he took in the spectacle of muggle fireworks lightening up the sky like their own sort of magic. He'd never seen muggle fireworks before. He'd always figured they'd be lackluster and dull compared to the moving wizarding sort. But there was something so soft and elegant about the whistle of something to come, and then the blast of color and loud bang of life in the sky. Draco's eyes started to gloss over as each second broke his heart with bittersweet beauty. It was the beginning, and it was the end. More and more colors blasted through the air, piling on top of each other. Each boom rocked the rooftop and Draco's soul. He glanced over to Potter to see the man not watching the sky, but him. Draco felt himself blush. A cold hand moved softly and cautiously into his warm one. Fingers interlaced, and a smile played on Potter's lips. Before Draco knew what Potter was doing, that smile touched his lips. A kiss so soft, so nervous, so scared. But it was there. Draco kissed back, just as soft, just as scared, just as devastatingly beautiful. After the kiss. When Draco returned home in the early morning, he stopped at the wall and turned the page of the calendar to a new kitten. It was a white snowball sort of thing sleeping in flowers. Underneath it, in pink cursive, was the worst advice he'd received yet.
"It's okay to cry. You still got this."
The white blonde man chuckled to himself. He didn't have this at all, not one bit. His chuckle turned into laughter. All he'd ever been taught was not to cry, never be weak, never. His laughter grew manic. He was dying, truly dying. His life as he knew it was coming to an end, and a kitten was saying that he had this. He shifted to lean against the wall as the manic laughter took over and wrecked his body. His side hurt, and he felt like he was going to vomit. He was so close to getting everything he wanted. A job he enjoyed, friends that loved him. His family no longer broken by fear and violence. He felt tears in his eyes as the laughter broke his resolve. He slipped down the wall to the floor, pulling his legs close to his chest. He was so close to having the man he was never allowed to have. But I'd kissed him. Kissed and kissed for what felt like hours. Kissed like schoolboys until they had to part and get back to the dorms before curfew. He had felt his soul transcend into the sky with those fireworks and blast apart like it had never been alive before. But when he pulled back, he could still feel his curse. He would be a dragon, and that would be that. He kissed Potter back as hard and as much as he could, but nothing in his bones changed. His hand was still hot, and Potter's was still cold. Draco's laughter finally broke into harsh sobs, wrecking his body and pulling him apart at the seams. In less than 6 months, he'd be a dragon. 6. Does it even matter? To whomever it may concern, please accept this letter as my notice of immediate resignation. Regards, Draco L. Malfoy. Whatever. The best way to ignore the present and future is to drink. At least that's what Draco thought as he tossed back another shot of tequila at his kitchen counter. He wasn't sure why he was even bothering with glasses anymore. He'd been steadily getting drunk for the last part of a week. In fact, he wasn't sure the last time he'd been sober. Possibly when he wrote his resignation letter. Most likely, since he didn't tell the ministry to fuck off. He should have. Maybe he would in another letter. More tequila, though, first. That made it easier not to think about Potter being the one to read his letter first. Let's ignore this. Standing in front of his pantry, Draco made a face of displeasure. Nothing looked interesting. He wanted a snack to go with his fire whiskey, but he couldn't quite put his finger on his craving. Something salty but rich. Something hearty but elegant to taste. Filling but lean and juicy. His eyes drifted to the corner which was spelled for low temperature. He could go for a steak. That would do. He was halfway finished eating it when he realized he forgot to cook it.
Maybe 85?
Father, if anything happens to me, donate half my vault to the Romanian Dragon Sanctuary. The other half can go to... Actually, just donate all of it. Blaze can get my villa I'm supposed to inherit. Pansy gets my wardrobe and inherited jewelry, and whatever else the fuck she wants. She earned it putting up with my ass at Hogwarts. Theo can have whatever he wants. I'm realizing I don't own shit for as much money as I have. Whatever, I don't care. All my Quidditch shit should go to Teddy, though. P.S. You were shit, Father, but I still loved you. Who cares? It was dark outside, but Draco had lost track of time, lost track of the days even. The kitten was still the white one, telling him it was okay to cry, but he knew they were well past that sentiment and date. He'd purchased a Muggle television, and it was honestly one of the best ideas of his life. These movie things were fucking great. They seemed so real, like a window. Even the knocking on the door was loud, and like it was on his own door. He yelled from where he lay on the couch. The knocking grew louder, and he rolled his eyes. He got up from the couch, stumbling slightly, because he was, of course, still drunk from the night before. Or maybe it was from this morning. Merlin, what time was it? He opened the door, ready to shout at the visitor to fuck off. Astoria! His ex stood there in a winter coat and high heels, pouting ruby-red lips. Your father said you need a bit of help getting your life back on track, so I thought I'd come help, she explained, stepping into the apartment and shutting the door behind her. Draco raised an eyebrow. Help how? The woman smiled and dropped her coat, revealing nothing underneath. Oh, that could work. He nodded, glad he wasn't so drunk he couldn't get it up. Astoria visiting did not help. Not how she envisioned it. It was a mediocre night of sex all around the apartment, though Draco was sure she had somehow gotten better at blowjobs since the last time her mouth was around his cock. But she also tasted like menthol cigarettes, not cloves. And her messy hair didn't fall the way he liked. She made high-pitched squeals that reminded him of his mother yelling at him. They kept drinking through the night, making all the bits and pieces fuzzier. Finally, he blacked out and the whole night went dark. In fact, the next thing Draco remembered was Astoria slapping him in the morning before she left. He wasn't sure what he did to deserve that. He definitely made her come multiple times. He was sure of it. Well, he usually did at least. Actually, he said, thanks for the fuck, but we're still over. So really, he deserved the slap. Sometimes or another. Between drinks, Draco found himself wandering into his closet and pulling out all his jewels. At first he told himself it was just to know what he was giving to Pansy, but then he found himself making haphazard piles of the different precious metals. When he noticed he didn't have nearly as much gold as he thought, he found himself wandering into Gringotts to visit his vault. He just wanted to make sure Pansy got the best. That's what he told himself, at least, until he got the stupid idea to lay on a pile of his gold in his vault. His skin hummed with happiness, and he felt as if he was slap-happy on some sort of muggle drug. The goblin accompanying him interrupted his piece, making Draco jump out of his skin. What in Merlin's bloody name was he doing rolling around in gold? Draco flushed in embarrassment and quickly got off the pile. He did his best to pretend it never happened and tried to ignore the 5 bags of gold and jewels he filled to bring home. Fuck it. After the Astoria slap, Draco decided it was safer not to drink at home, which to any sober person probably seemed a little backwards, but alas, the boy was not sober. Not one bit, not for 1 minute. Plus, muggle pops were less likely to end in bad mornings. He thought. He hoped. Except one morning, a slamming door awoke Draco from his dead slumber. He looked around the bedroom he had never been in before. He barely even remembered how he got there. He'd been at a bar, or a club, or something with bright lights and lots of tequila shots. Slowly he lifted himself from the bed, trying to find his clothing in the mess on the floor without puking. He found his wand poking out from underneath the bed. Fuck. The photos on the dresser didn't move. Bigger fuck, he was at a Muggles. He couldn't remember the person's name, let alone face. Did he do magic in front of them? Did he talk about anything wizarding? He found his pants and started jumping up and down to get them on quicker. He shoved his wand in his back pocket. He was an Auror, for Salazar's sake. No, he was an ex-Auror. Shit. Same difference. He disapparated just as the doorknob started to turn. When he finally opened his eyes to see his own living room, he puked. Question mark, question mark, question mark? Draco wasn't quite sure how he got there or how long he'd been standing there, but when he finally realized he was on the sidewalk in front of number 12 Grimmauld Place, he felt his stomach churn violently. He checked his limbs to make sure he didn't splinch himself apparating while drunk and found that while he was all intact, he was also holding a piece of parchment in his hands. The deed to number 12. As the last one of the Black Line, it was technically his house. He knew that his cousin had given it to Potter, but magic didn't recognize that. No, it was Draco's, and the building knew that by revealing itself in his presence. The moving of the building must have alerted whoever was inside, because the front door of number 12 opened and there stood Potter in the doorway, still as disheveled and beautiful as ever. Green eyes met silver ones. They weren't mad or full of anger. No, they were surprised and concerned. Draco felt his stomach churn again. I. He stuttered, probably not loud enough for Potter to hear, but the man in the doorway took a step outside anyway. Malfoy, are you okay? Potter asked, walking down the steps slowly. You'd quit, and I tried to come by, but the ward's on your place. I tried to write, but you really don't look okay. You should come inside. It was oily and grimy, and he instantly regretted it. No, I'm fine. I shouldn't even be here. He drunkenly shook his head. Let me get you some coffee at least. Or we can talk a bit. Potter tried again. Draco just shook his head and held out the deed. The writing sparkled gold like his snitch. Draco smiled softly. It's yours. It always wanted to be yours. Potter looked at the paper quizzically before taking it. Once Draco felt the paper slip from his fingers, he disapparated away. With a pop, Draco landed on his kitchen floor. He collapsed and curled his body into a ball as the sobs racked his body once again. Finally, unlike Astoria, Pansy Parkinson did not knock. No, she blasted doors down. Fuck the wards that were trying to keep her out. She was a force. Draco was startled. He fell off the couch onto the floor with all the empty beer bottles, Kit Kat wrappers, and gold coins. The woman didn't give a fuck as she strode in and started cleaning magic at all the empty food cartons scattered around the place. She was surprised nothing was living in any of the piles of trash.
This place is disgusting. Is that raw meat?
She said, making a face at the smell. Draco looked around and shrugged. He wasn't sure the last time he showered, let alone what day it was. You're disgusting, he muttered back immaturely and took a sip of a half-full beer bottle he found on the floor. It was warm, but it still did just fine. She rolled her eyes.
What the fuck is wrong with ye?
She snapped as she crossed the living room and started pulling him up off the floor.
Theo, help me!
Draco blinked a few times and realized Theo was also there. And Blaze. A whole party if they played their cards right. Salazar, what's with all the gold? Theo asked as he took in the pile of gold coins that Draco had been sitting on top of on the couch. He examined it in the air. Draco gasped as it glinted in the light. Don't touch it, Draco growled quickly, then turned back to his normal self. But wait, I found this great club, Draco said, shaking Pansy off and standing on his own. He swayed slightly, but he didn't fall. A win in his book, if you asked him. Let me change and we can. Pansy, go get the shower started, Theo demanded. Make it cold, Blaze agreed. Before Draco knew it, he was getting hauled into the bathroom and shoved under a stream of ice-cold water. The water turned to steam as it touched his hot skin, but it still did the job, waking him up from his haze. Enough to realize he did not want to be sober. Stop! Fuck you both! He yelled, trying to kick and punch himself out of Blaze and Theo's grasps. He wanted nothing more than to stay in his haze, to keep ignoring the doom of his future, to forget that he could have a life he loved and love he lived for. He screamed bloody murder at the top of his lungs. I'll fucking crush you all when I get my hands on my wand.
This wand?
Pansy asked, twirling it between her fingers and holding up a large emerald on a chain.
Also, I'm keeping this necklace.
Give it back, now,
he demanded, not sure if he meant the wand or the necklace. But like good friends, none of them listened. 7. 1 week. It took time to sober Draco back up. The Slytherin trio worked in shifts, taking care of their friend, nursing him through withdrawals and back to sobriety. With the help of magic, they cleaned up his place and washed away the stench of vomit and stale liquor from the floors. They hugged him through the shakes and sat on the bathroom floor with him when his stomach revolted against the change. Pansy let him sleep with his head in her lap and played with his hair while the boys restocked the fridge with real food. At some point, Theo had declared the kittens creeped him out and took down the calendar. Finally, in the middle of one night, Draco awoke with his head on Theo's chest and with Blaise curled behind him. Pansy, on Theo's other side, curled into his armpit and hugged close. Even in their sleep, they looked worn out and exhausted, but they all held each other tight. He thought about moving and extracting himself from the warmth and safety of his friends. But the thought that this could be the last time he ever felt so loved kept him from moving. Maybe he didn't know true love, but he knew this love, and he was going to soak in it until the end. 3.
Draco, yo, thanks for the donation. Got the new sanctuary section all set up for your new body. It's got a lake view and everything. Harry told me you're going through a hard time, so I hope this note finds you well. You always got a friend here in Romania, and not just a FWB. Happy almost birthday, Charlie.
2. Draco stared at the letter in his hand. He'd been reading it and rereading it for a day. He hadn't realized it was so close. His stomach churned, and he felt bile rise again in his throat. He wanted a drink, to ignore it, to forget it. Pansy plucked the parchment from his hands, and her dark eyes read over Charlie's words.
What's he mean about your new body? Pansy asked.
You fucked Charlie Weasley?
Theo asked, reading over Pansy's shoulder. Blaise hummed in agreement.
It's time.
The three of them had still not left Draco's flat, and he had not asked them to, even though he had been doing better the past week.
Time?
Draco asked, snatching the paper back.
Yeah, Theo agreed. Time to tell us everything.
Now Draco really wanted a drink. But instead, he leaned back on the couch and chose to finally tell his best friends everything. From the prophecy and finding out Potter was his true love, to telling Potter he liked him at the club, to fucking Charlie in Romania, to Weasley still hating him, to not deserving Potter even as a friend, to being kissed on New Year's, to being called shy, to the sweet taste of clove cigarettes that haunted him, to the snitch he could never have, to how Potter's blush started on his chest and worked its way up, to how in 3 days' time he would turn into a dragon because the kiss didn't end the curse, to how his life was over and he'd missed them most. Pansy was in tears by the time he finished talking, using Theo's chest as a handkerchief. Theo himself was quiet, looking at his feet, clearly processing everything he could do to find a way to change it all. It was only Blaise who spoke up, sighing loudly and rolling his eyes.
Merlin, you're a fucking idiot,
he declared, annoyance and not one drop of sympathy or anguish in his tone.
Excuse me?
Draco snapped his eyes at his friend in the chair across from him.
You heard me.
Blaise snapped right back.
I mean, I agree, but for other reasons,
chimed Theo.
Blaise, explain,
Pansy said between sniffs.
The chosen isn't Potter, explained Blaise. He's the chosen one, but he's not your chosen true love because you fucking refuse to choose him and keep bloody pushing him away. So hence, you're an idiot.
I thought you were going to say you're the sinner. Theo noted to Blaise, then turned to Draco.
But he has a point. Potter kissed you, not the other way around.
Draco looked between his friends as he processed what Blaise revealed. It was true. Potter was the chosen one, but that's not what the prophecy said. Not exactly, at least. The chosen true love could slay the dragon curse. He could have fallen in love with anyone as long as he just let love in. It was his own stupid heart that wanted Potter, not the fates. Potter had chosen him, kissed him even, and Draco thought,
Bloody hell, he was an idiot. That's what he got for calling the Fates stupid. Fuck! Draco yelled, plopped back onto the couch and pulled at his hair.
You told him you liked him and then fucked his best friend's older brother,
Pansy gasped. I thought he didn't remember, Draco groaned, his hands moving from his hair to covering his face as the pieces fell into place. He thought back to their fight when he returned from Romania. He threw it in Potter's face that he fucked Charlie. No wonder he was pissed off. Clearly he did, scoffed Blaise. Draco peeked through his fingers to glare at his friend. Sometimes he liked it better when Blaise didn't talk, mostly because Blaise was always right. Fuck! Draco repeated. Then he kissed you, and you thought, let me quit and go on a raging bender and fuck half the wizarding and muggle world, Theo added. It wasn't half, scolded Draco.
You fucked Astoria and that was enough,
Pansy groaned. Is that why she slapped me? Draco asked innocently. Shit. They all leaned back into the couch and chairs, thinking and processing the news that could have been figured out almost a year ago. Draco's silver eyes traveled from friend to friend to friend, concern on all their faces, hearts breaking from learning they were losing their friend. He thought about the prophecy, about choosing love. How maybe choosing true love wasn't just with a kiss, but also seeking help from his friends. Fuck, he was worse than an idiot, whatever that was. I'm sorry, he told them. They looked up, and he said it again. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner, didn't choose to tell you sooner, that I should have known you would have helped and never let me go through this alone. It's not us you need to say sorry to, Theo shrugged.
Kinda is, countered Pansy, but he's also right. Potter even wrote he was worried about you and asked us to check in. He still cares about you.
Merlin, I fucked this up, Draco sighed and stood up, running his hand through his hair. He looked at Blaise. If this goes badly and I turn into a French Tarrasque, murder me on the spot. Easy. Blaise nodded, and then Draco disapparated. Theo and Pansy exchanged looks, then turned to their friend, shouting together. Easy? 1. Thankfully, number 12 still recognized him and appeared as he crossed the street towards the building. He remembered giving Potter the deed, and honestly, even in his stupid drunkenness, he knew it was the right move. The house belonged to Potter, not him. It was late at night, the street was quiet, and the stars winked mischievously down at the blond men that thought he outsmarted them. He knocked loudly, hoping that Potter wasn't already asleep. He stood on the top step, wringing his fingers together, biting his lip, and feeling his nerves start to take over. Maybe Potter was asleep. Maybe he was out. Maybe he was on a date. Maybe this was a bad idea and Draco deserved to become a dragon. But just as he was about to step away, the door opened and there was Potter, half asleep, glasses askew, and hair even messier. He must have fallen asleep on the couch. Malfoy, Potter asked, holding back a yawn. Is everything okay? It's nearly 1 a.m. Yes and no. Yes and no. Draco stumbled over his words. Potter seemed even more confused. Draco pushed his hands through his hair and tried again. I fucked up. I freaked out and I pushed, because I don't deserve you. Because I'm broken and scarred and a total fucking mess, and we don't make sense, but not having you doesn't make sense either. You know, I'm just as fucked up, Potter said, leaning against the doorframe, crossing his arms and pursing his lips together to hide a smile. You didn't fuck Charlie Weasley. Draco rolled his eyes. Potter snorted. No, I guess I didn't. But I shouldn't have just cut you out. Charlie only told me you were having a tough time, and I was hurt you went to him, not me. And I wasn't even sure you remembered what you said at the club. He explained, then added on. And then also that you fucked him, or he fucked you, if I remember correctly. Draco felt the blush on his already warm cheeks. Merlin, he said that, hadn't he? He was such a fucking jerk when he was scared. He supposed that went all the way back to their relationship back in Hogwarts, even. You didn't have to quit either, you know, Potter added. I was stupid, thinking if I got you alone and kissed you, maybe you'd want me again, and... I've always wanted you, ever since I met you, Draco interrupted. Potter's eyes grew, but he didn't go back to what he'd been saying. He didn't say anything, but Draco noticed a soft blush creeping upward from Potter's collar. Draco bit his lip. He had nothing more to lose, so he continued instead. I figured you probably regretted it, and I didn't know how to fucking deal with sitting across from you day after day, knowing I have no chance. And then I went on a stupid bender and did some really stupid shit that might make you hate me again if I mention it.
As long as you didn't fuck Ron too,
Potter quipped.
Draco made a face.
No, one Weasley's enough for me.
Me too,
Potter chuckled.
The smile he had been trying to hide earlier spat on his lips as he straightened up from the doorframe.
I know another way for you to deal with it.
Draco bit his lip.
How's that?
Come inside,
Potter asked, making room for Draco to step by. Draco nodded and stepped forward, crossing the threshold into number 12. But instead of continuing inside, he stepped closer to Potter. The other man inhaled sharply, and his body swapped closer, his nose just grazing against Draco's. Draco could smell the sweet cloves on his breath. The scent of syrup and butter hovered in his clothing. His hands clenched with the need to touch. He closed his eyes, thinking of everything that was holding him back, and that told him he wasn't allowed to have this. He thought of the mistakes he made at Hogwarts, the ones he could never say sorry enough for. He thought about the lives he ruined. He thought about the lonely nights and the way he was just happy to sit across from Potter without having anything more. He thought about all the times he told himself he didn't deserve love and happiness, that his inner demon told him he was a Class 5 extremely dangerous and murderous monster. And then he let it all go. He took a breath and decided it was time to forgive himself too. He decided to kiss Potter. He was choosing this, them. Lips touched lips, and muggle fireworks burst inside of him. His hand reached out and found Potter's waist, moving around the other man and pulling him closer than he'd ever been, asking for forgiveness instead of just permission. He tasted the sweetness of cloves, then was consumed by it when Potter opened his mouth to his. Potter's arms wrapped around his neck and got lost in Draco's hair. Together they moved farther into number 12, knocking into a heavy 12-foot umbrella stand and nearly toppling over. They held tight to each other to keep upright, but their bodies betrayed their true ones as they ground against the other. Potter's hands moved quickly, moving down to Draco's jumper and tugging it over the blonde's head and tossing it somewhere in the dark distance. Draco returned the favor, fiddling with the buttons to Potter's classic flannel shirt and tugging it off his shoulders as Draco's mouth found heaven on Potter's neck. Groans exploded out of the other man, his tanned hands gripping at Draco's hair again.
Upstairs,
he directed weakly. He was able to peel Draco away for a moment, but grabbed his hand and laced their fingers to keep them connected as they sprinted up the stairs together. They barely made it to the landing before Potter was turning around to kiss Draco again. Their momentum caused Potter to fall backwards onto the landing and put Draco down on top of him. They were trying to keep their wits about them, but each kiss pulled them deeper. Draco could feel the heat on his skin, not from the curse, but Potter's touch lightening every cell that had gone dormant from self-hate. Their lips fought against each other, swollen and beautiful from bites and nips, kissing hard with tongues dancing against the others. Draco's pale fingers undid the buttons to Potter's muggle jeans, and his hand found gold as it slipped inside. He pulled back just enough to search Potter's eyes for resistance, for any hint of doubt, but there was nothing there but the bursting green of want, lust, and a deep longing Draco knew matched his own. "Gods, you're beautiful." Potter smiled up at him before making a gasping noise as Draco began to pump him. He leaned up and pressed his lips against Draco's once again, holding on to the blonde's shoulders and raking his nails against his skin. The floor was dusty and dirty, but a need was taking over that left both men panting and desperate for more touch. Potter's nails scratched down Draco's sides all the way to the V of his hips and untied his joggers. His fingers stopped just before shoving them down. "I'm sorry, but this floor is disgusting," Potter said, and Draco barked with laughter. "And everyone calls me the press," quipped Draco as he moved to stand and help Potter off the ground. Potter kept their hands locked together as he pulled Draco down the hall to his bedroom. Draco barely had a moment to take in his surroundings before being pushed on the bed and lips connected with lips again. Their hands worked quickly, helping each other shed their pants and final bits of clothing before there was nothing stopping their bodies from pressing together. Draco rolled them over, pinning Potter underneath him and grinding their cocks together. Potter swore loudly and arched his body into Draco's, grinding back hard enough to make the pale men above him swear right back. His fingers found Draco's cock and wrapped around him, starting to pump him slowly, using his thumb at the tip to swipe the bit of precrum and use it as extra lube. Draco was seeing stars with fireworks bursting in between and did his best to navigate his hand in the night table drawer that Potter pointed to. He fumbled around and finally found the lube Potter mentioned between kisses. He found his wand next, using a cleansing spell quickly before applying the lube to his fingers. As much as he wanted Potter, he took his time, teasing the right spot, circling with his fingers before pressing inside and making the men under him moan his name. He moved slowly, letting Potter relax and adjust before adding a second, and began to move them together. Potter arched against him once more, this time moving to wrap his legs around Draco's waist and grind together again.
"Fuck, Potter, be patient,"
Draco muttered, because he was starting to lose any of his own patience when being touched this way.
"You try wanting this for years,"
he shot back, making Draco laugh and then kissed the man all over again as he moved to position himself.
"Try for over a decade,"
Draco confessed, making Potter smile even while drenched in lust. Every emotion and feeling welled up inside of him as he pressed into the men below him. Their hips tilted together so that he could sink so deep he felt consumed. There were so many adjectives entering his mind that it was turning to putty. Heavenly, perfect, home. Draco opened his eyes to see green ones staring back at him. Potter's breath was shallow as he adjusted, slowly rolling his hips to get more and more to sink into him, but there was a smile still there. He looked like he melted. That was where he belonged. He looked like love. Draco smiled back as his own self melted and combined with his childhood foe. He moved one hand to cup Potter's face and leaned down to kiss him softly, tenderly, to love him deeply with every year that built between them. They didn't have to say it for the switch in the universe to finally flip. It was a look, a feeling, a knowing that appeased the fates and sent the stars down to earth. It was a kiss that made them start moving together to add friction to their skin and tell the gold in their veins to start bubbling. It was a deep thrust and gasps of names that cast a magic so old most forgot it existed. It was nails scratching down Draco's back and bruises on Potter's hips that activated the gold thread. It wrapped around them thick and tight, tying them together and blinding their souls. It felt like they were levitating, that they left the room and were in another atmosphere, on another planet. Just them and the stars, wrapping around each other, sinking deep into that spot and becoming part of each other. They came hard together, holding on to the other, a gold thread stretching from their hearts and tying together in a knot that could never be untied. Draco was panting hard, his hair glued to his forehead from sweat, and a cool chill rushed over his skin that he had not felt in months. He opened his silver eyes to look at the men beneath him. His golden tan skin glistening with sweat, and his breath just as labored. There was stick and sweat gluing their bodies together, but neither moved to reposition. Even as they came down, Draco didn't pull out, nor did Potter unwrap his legs. Instead, they just stayed there, together, smiling, loving.
"I'm sorry for ever hurting you,"
he whispered softly.
"I'm sorry too,"
Potter said, his fingers softly tracing the Sectum Sempra scar that started on Draco's collarbone and moved across his chest. Draco took hold of Potter's fingers and kissed the tip softly. In turn, Potter leaned up and kissed Draco fully with a true love's kiss so tender it slayed a dragon. 0. Morning sun drifted through a crack in the curtains, awakening Draco to an empty bed. Slowly he peeled himself from under the covers and found his joggers on the floor. The night had continued into the early hours, more kissing, more touching, more learning and discovering. He shuffled from the room and down the dank stairs, chuckling as he found his and Potter's shirt thrown over the railing. His body was sore from when he did let Potter bend him over the dresser, though he would not be telling Pansy about that. Number 12 looked like it had been attempted to be cleaned and brightened up, numerous times even, but it still had the shabbiness of an old pure-blood house that rotted from too much dark magic over the years.
"What's with the curtain wall?"
Draco asked as he entered the kitchen, finding Potter at the stove cooking the mug away. He saw 2 coffees set out on the table, a very sugary coffee with milk that was half drank, and a black coffee set with a warming charm.
A portrait of Mrs. Black. Yells at everyone for being blood traitor trash,
Potter explained as he plated the pancakes and Draco sipped his black coffee.
Why don't you just take her down?
Draco asked, sticking his fingers in the syrup for taste. Potter swatted at him, making him chuckle.
Tried. Nothing works, magic or muggle,
Potter said, turning his back to Draco as he added the finishing touches to their breakfast.
Ah, a black family sticking spell then. Sirius was kicked out, but I can probably do it.
Draco shrugged.
Fuck, I would have shagged you sooner if I knew it was that simple.
Potter laughed, shaking his head. Then he turned around, plate of pancakes in his hand with a lit birthday candle stuck in them. Thank Salazar, he was no longer craving raw meat.
This is disgustingly cute, Potter.
Draco smiled embarrassedly. Now he was the one with the creeping blush taking over.
Harry,
he corrected. Draco smiled wider, taking over his whole face as he repeated.
Harry.
And well, it's your birthday, isn't it?
Harry asked, glancing over at the calendar on the wall. It was a Quidditch calendar with no inspirational quotes. Thank fucking Merlin.
I suppose it is.
Draco bit his lip. He closed his eyes, thinking for a moment of all the things he could wish to come. But the fact of matter was he actually got to wish at all. That there was a future in front of him, and that was more than he could wish for. So instead of blowing out the candle, he leaned in and kissed Harry lovingly. The end. Thank you for listening to The Third Worst Year by TheFrancakes, read by Ella McSmith-Beller. If you would like to stay up to date on upcoming chapters and stories, you can follow me on YouTube, Instagram, AO3, Spotify, or Tumblr.